Now, it is my pleasure and a great privilege to welcome my dear friend, Carrie Mae Weems, to Harvard University's Sackler Museum this evening. Carrie Mae is one of our most distinguished artists at work today. For almost 30 years, we have turned to her photographic and multimedia work she started when she was 2 years old, to learn about and to think about the ways in which we experience the complex web of gender, race, sexuality, sensuality. A lot of people represent sexuality, but nobody represents sensuality like Carrie Mae Weems. Class, family, and community, a combination that visually and emotionally catches us all. Weems's family followed a different migratory path than most black families in this country, moving from Mississippi to Portland, Oregon, where she was born. And perhaps it's this doubly unique experience to grow up black in a largely white environment and to grow up black in an environment unlike that experienced by most African Americans that gave Weems her strikingly original perspective that made her acutely aware of how a community's stories about itself and stories about the world outside, how they both affect the individual's understanding of and construction of herself. For Weems, the individual woman in particular is never simply or ever a passive construction, a theoretical concept that was all the rage in art produced by women in the late 1970s when Weems first appeared on the scene. Rather, she is a vibrant and vital performer in the stories she tells and the stories that are told about her. Weems's earliest documentary photographic series, Family Pictures and Stories, stayed close to home, pairing images of Weems's family with their own narratives. From this first series, her work began to reveal a more overtly political aim, with Ain't Jokin', 1987-88, Colored People, title that I love and stole from my own autobiography, and the magnificent Kitchen Table series, 1990, exploring identity politics both inside and outside the home. Since Kitchen Table, Carrie Mae has continued to broaden her perspective with works that treat of the African diaspora and Africa itself, the Sea Island series, and the series Africa Slave Coast, and Landed in Africa from 1993, Sea Islands 1991, 1992. She's incorporated other materials as well into her work, with the 3 large-scale fabric installations called Ritual and Revolution, 1998, commissioned by the Whitney, the Jefferson Suite, 99, commissioned by the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, the Hampton Project, a year later, in the year 2000, commissioned by the Williams College Museum of Art. Following these was another multimedia project, the Louisiana Project, commemorating the bicentennial of the Louisiana Purchase, with a look at Louisiana's hidden history of race and class. Coming up for air in 2004, marked Weems's first foray into the video arts. Carrie Mae holds a bachelor's degree from California Institute of the Arts, Valencia, and master's degrees from UC San Diego and Berkeley. She's the recipient of numerous awards. If I gave all those, we'd be here all night long, including the Louis Comfort Tiffany Award, the Photographer of the Year Award from Friends of Photography Ansel Adams Center, San Francisco, an NEA Visual Arts Grant, and the Distinguished Photographers Award of 2005 from Women in Photography International. She's had one-person exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art, the International Center for Photography, the Getty, and the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco. In 1995, she was one of 4 artists featured in the PBS documentary Conjure Women. But the best thing about Carrie Mae, 2 best things. One, after I moved to Harvard and became the chair of the Department of African American Studies, one day, just out of the blue, my secretary handed me a package that said, "Opened only by Henry Louis Gates," and I opened it, and it was a beautiful photograph of Carrie Mae sitting at a kitchen table. And it hangs in the wall of my office, and every day I get to see you, every day of my life, which is a great delight. And the other best thing about Carrie Mae is that she's my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome my friend Carrie Mae Weems to Harvard.
What an introduction. I feel like I don't have to say anything. I am so lucky. I'm so fortunate. I want to thank Dell Hamilton for organizing this exhibition here at the Du Bois Center, for being a constant contact, being a friend and a mentor through helping this whole project through, to the Sackler for inviting me here and organizing, allowing us to be here and hosting my visit as well, and of course to my great friend Henry Louis Gates, who I think of as being, I think first and foremost really an astounding mentor, because all I have to do is to look out into the world and see what it is that he's producing and making and building and designing and organizing that gives me, I think, a certain kind of courage to continue doing what I do. I think we all owe you an incredible debt of thanks for your ingenuity, your insight, and your dedication. So thank you. I think perhaps there's what I tried to do, what I wanted to do was to bring together a body of work. And it's true, I've been working actually for a very long time now and trying to break through. I think I keep working because I'm trying to break through. But I thought that, you know, what I would try and do tonight would be to show you a set of works, photographic works, and then we would then perhaps end with a few short video segments, video projects that I've been working on for the last couple of years, so that you'll see some of that work. I think most people don't really know me very well, actually, in that arena at all, and I don't show them very much, only occasionally, but I hope you find them interesting, and hopefully we'll make some time, some space to do that, and then, of course, we'll have some question and answer, I hope, or comment from you after. So what I'm going to do is ask you to dim the lights. I'm going to go through a lot of work. I am not going to talk about all this work because it would take us really much too long. But I thought that we would start with, and always I think the place that I prefer to start is not really about talking about my work, but talking about all those artists that have been absolutely important to the way in which I think about the world, the way in which I think about what matters for artists, through artists, and because of artists. And one of the things that I think that I am most aware of constantly is the way in which artists are always thinking about and using themselves, their bodies, as a way to investigate this thing that we call the human experience, the human enterprise, the human endeavor. Artists are always attempting to delineate and to define for us through a set of poetic gesture, whether it be through photograph or through dance or through music, those ideas of incredible expressive utterance that gives us an awareness, a deeper awareness about who we are, why we are, and what we're trying to do during this short little time that we happen to be on this planet. I keep thinking about the way that artists are forever humiliating themselves and wounding themselves and belittling themselves in order to break through that thing, to break through to the other side, to break through the glass ceiling, to break through the door, to break through the gate, whether it's psychological, whether it's sociological, whether it's cultural, this sort of ongoing effort, we can almost call it like a systemic effort on the part of artists to break through, using always the body, their bodies themselves, often as a way of navigating this difficult experience. The act of performance, the act of acting out, always implicating oneself and implicating the other. using the body to mark, to describe, to weigh in, to articulate. Using it to display, using it to critique, using it to examine, using it to explore, using it to become the other, as in the case of Eleanor Anton in Black Antonova, using it in the way of rubbing up and bumping against the external world, forcing the world in some way to negotiate with you, to negotiate space with you, Adrian Piper. Using it as a way to understand what the AIDS crisis was, insisting that the audience would have to pass through a set of beaded, red beaded, white beaded curtains. One of the most articulate, I think, one of the most beautiful laying out of the sort of examination of AIDS and the crises of AIDS. Felix Gonzalez Torres, we miss you. Ana Mandito, who chose to, of course, always lay out her body in space, bearing it in space, tiptoeing through eggshells. Extraordinary work. Or Chris Marker, and of course some of you probably know his brilliant work, La Jetée, based on a series of still photographs, reminding us about how those photographs are always used, that we can construct any number of narratives vis-a-vis the photograph, that they are constructions around a kind of deeper truth. Not that the photograph is true, but its underlying concept, its underlying structure, what it points to, what it attempts to point to, being that which is true. My work from Kitchen Table, not from Kitchen Table, but from Family Pictures and Stories, one of the first works that I did as I was trying to figure out a way of breaking through, a way of trying to figure out ideas about narrative, ideas about story, ideas about photography as a documentary tool, as a tool of reportage, and then, of course, as a way of providing another kind of personal narrative as well. Or a piece like Ain't Joking, which became a very important series of works to work with as I was finishing up my work at Berkeley. In fact, I never received my degree at Berkeley. I'm still trying to get it.
We'll give you one.
You promise? Yeah. But I did work there for a few years, and a friend of mine is here, James Robinson, who was also there with me at Berkeley. We studied with Alan Dundes, and the work there was very much centered around humor for me, humor and the way in which humor was used, the sort of the social engagement of humor, how it functioned in a very particular way. Sandra Gilman has also done some really brilliant work around humor and how humor works. Looking into the mirror, the black woman asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the finest of them all?" The mirror says, "Snow White, you black bitch, and don't you forget it." You know, these sort of ways in which, like humor is used both inside the black community and outside the black community. You know, the context of who is telling the joke. Who is telling the joke always matters, right? What side is the joke coming from? You know, is it being used in order to reinforce stereotypes or, in fact, as a meta-critique on stereotypes itself? You know, what are the three things you can't give a black person? A black eye, a fat lip, or a job. Still current. So I've done many different kinds of projects, and again, as I said, I won't talk about all of them. But I did decide that I needed to. You know, I'm crazy about singing, that I can't sing a lick. And I thought that sort of one sort of singular space that black people for a long time have been given considerable space to act out was, of course, on the performance stage. And so I thought that maybe it'd be helpful to do a gold record, my own gold record, called Ode to Affirmative Action, Side 1 and Side 2. They sell for $7.99 if anybody is interested in them. I remember asking my dean at the time, I was teaching in Hampshire, I was asking my dean at the time if he'd be a part of one of my backup singers. And he said, "Absolutely not, Carrie." Things like Sea Islands were important projects because not only did they bring together my own kind of search for trying to understand something about the Gullah and the Geechee that my father used to talk about growing up in the South, but also my desire to look at material culture in a very particular kind of way. And so I spent a lot of time in the Sea Islands looking and photographing and trying to understand something about the way in which a culture really defines itself through the materials that it uses, that it builds, that it places around itself, in proximity to itself. And there is much that we could talk about in relationship to the Sea Islands and the belief system in the Sea Islands, how that functions too as a way of warding off evil, protecting one from evilness, or for that matter, shoring up again the culture. I've spent lots of time working with, collaborating with small groups, and a few years ago I started collaborating with these young women. I've been working with them fairly consistently, maybe for the last 5 years, and so we've done a series of projects together. These were all about Manet. I'm a great fan of the painter. And I always thought that it might be really wonderful to sort of pull that black figure that had been floating out there in the background, pressed in the background, to bring that quality of essence forward, and to be able to look at that much more critically, using this black body, I think, as a way of engaging the public not only around the question of race, but also around the question of beauty and sublime, things that deal with the breadth of our humanity, that move us outside that trap box and allow us to express something that's fuller and richer about the essence of who we are. From Kitchen Table series. Some of these works, of course, are just here now. There's a small group of them that are showing at the Du Bois Center in the exhibition that we're calling All About Eve. This was an image text piece. And again, one of those sort of important pieces of work that allowed me to break through. I was, again, living in New England at the time, teaching at Hampshire College, trying to figure out a way. I mean, a number of you are artists that are in the audience, to try to figure out a way to look past, to engage the viewer, not only with, again, the context of family and blackness, but to engage the viewer in the sort of more deeper question of relationship, of interpersonal relationship. And to sort of also, I mean, I'm thinking about, like how photographs are constructed. In a lot of ways, at this moment, there was like a very interesting thing that was going on, because a lot of women were very afraid to sort of look at themselves, to look at themselves squarely. There was a lot of writing, a lot of theoretical writing that had been going on about the gaze and who was looking, and about the objectification of women, and that, And I thought that there needed to be a way that the female subject could in fact engage, that she was the constructor of her own presence. And that these photographs, while they looked as though they could be documentary, were not, that they were highly constructed, highly staged photographs that I think tried to speak to an underlying truth about the relationship between women and women, between women and children, between women and men, between black women and white women, etc., playing around a whole series of contexts and sort of deep relationship that happens between us as humans. Using this single light, this sort of light of illumination. Sometimes it's very interesting to me that it takes a long time, I think, often for artists to really understand exactly what they're doing. Or perhaps, maybe for that matter, any of us to really understand what we're doing. We know that we're working towards something. We don't always understand exactly what it is, but we know that we have to do it, that we are absolutely compelled to engage in a certain kind of way and to look at things in a very particular kind of way. Sometimes we look at things sideways. Sometimes we look at things straight on. One of the things that it finally sort of occurred to me at a certain moment, really only a few years ago, that most of my life has been spent really acting out and using my own body as a way of acting out, using my own body as a way of absorbing huge amounts of experience and understanding, using it as a kind of barometer, a social barometer for understanding the way in which women are understood culturally and socially. Standing on shaky ground, I posed myself for critical study, but was no longer certain of the questions to be asked. It was clear I was not Manet's type. Picasso, who had a way with women, only used me, and Duchamp, whom I loved, never even considered me. And then it goes on to say something like, but it could have been worse. Imagine my fate had de Kooning gotten hold of me. And so I took a tip from Frida, who from her bed painted incessantly while Diego scaled the scaffolds to the very top of the world. With artists helping me always along the way. When I met Robert Colescott, I didn't really know yet. I think I was embarrassed to admit that I knew what was going on in his work. You know, that I was embarrassed by the knowledge of what his work sort of laid out for me. And so I was very angry with him for making me have to deal with some ideas that I really wanted to avoid. But then he asked that I photograph him for the Venice Biennale when he represented the United States, which I thought was really kind of interesting, that he would ask that I photograph him. So I knew that he wasn't particularly interested in a portrait. So I thought about it, and I went to see him, and we had this really great time together. We spent an afternoon together, and I decided to make this piece about Colescott and about myself, but of course we are extras. We are sort of, you know, meta people in this little terrain, seduced by one another, yet bound by certain social conventions. You framed me, and I framed you. And even though we knew better, we continued that time-honored tradition of the artist and his model. That idea where, you know, that one is always sort of implicating themselves in the way in which one might be victimized, I think is an important acknowledgement. How do I implicate myself in my own victimization? How am I an accomplice in my own victimization was a process that I think I needed to work through with Colescott as a painter, and as a woman, and as a black woman, and as a photographer, and as his model. But placing myself, of course, in the context to be looked at in that way, even while I am constructing a critical narrative around that interplay. From the Africa series. And but as with, you know, like a lot of these works have text that go along with them. And so they never hang really linearly on the wall. There are things that are going up and down and around. There are things that are smashed into corners and little narrative text that, you know, spin out of control. There's always something else that's sort of going on around the photograph. And I'm very much interested in the way in which a public engages the photograph, right? They engage the language, they engage a text, they engage an image, they engage beauty, they engage shape and form, all of those things, but you're always being pushed and pulled in relationship to both the image and the text, because the text is making you do something else, right? It's placing you in another kind of zone. And so there's a kind of awareness, a kind of self-awareness that you are conscious of, I think, in the exhibitions that I attempt to make, or the exhibitions that I've designed. From Mali, from a trip there, these sort of amazing, amazing figures, these amazing buildings, right, that are so completely human in form. these ideas that sexuality is really spelled out in the architecture, I think is really sort of an amazing thing. And it's something that, I realized, again, only a few years ago, that I was absolutely in love with architecture. The way in which the architecture functions, the way in which it inscribes, the way in which it tells us something about the history that has gone before, or the moment that we're living now. The power of architecture never ceases to amaze me and to engage me. All of these, pieces that I've made, right? All of these pieces that I've made, this idea that I have to use myself, not so much as Carrie, though I'm deeply grateful for the experiences, Carrie, right? To use myself as a way of marking what is important and what is significant about a place and about a culture, that I can stand in for any number of people, that I am the muse, that I stand in for the viewer. The viewer can place themselves in that situation along with me. So these are a group of pieces that I made in Havana, I don't know, maybe in 2003, 2004. I wanted to place myself in the situation in a number of different contexts around Havana, and then, of course, in Santiago, too, because I wanted to understand something about the nature of Cuban society, the nature of the revolution, the nature of work there, the nature of family there. All of those issues were really sort of important, and so the way that I've developed, as an artist, is to put myself in those situations where I actually have to work. I actually have to work. So I decided that in order to know something about sugarcane and what that meant to shuck cane, I needed to shuck some cane. I needed to experience that. So I needed to cut tobacco because I wanted to know what that felt like. I wanted to know the danger of that. And so that's been this sort of method and this sort of way of working. And it was this, so that each project for me sort of naturally leads to the next. This sort of way of filling the frame, this way of standing in for the viewer, this way of asking the viewer also to follow me in, that I am using this body only to point to direct. These were made in Beacon, New York, where the DIA Foundation moved not too long ago, and I was asked to do a project there. I did a project there called The Record Shop. DIA was a fascinating place because, of course, it had been completely flattened out, completely bottomed out when all the industry moved away several years ago, back in the 60s. So there's been this sort of regeneration. DIA moved in, and lots of artists were moving in. And I was sent there to make this little photographic thing. And I thought, well, I can't just make a little photographic thing. I have to be there for a while. And it sort of occurred to me that I really needed to be in Beacon for maybe 2 or 3 years in order to really understand what was going to happen in that city as that city underwent this sort of tremendous change. So that when I went to Beacon the first time, maybe you could buy a house for $30,000. Now maybe a house costs you $350,000 or $500,000 in the same neighborhood, right? So it's changed drastically as a result of DIA Beacon moving there, and there was something important about that I wanted to chronicle. The other thing that was important about Beacon that I really needed to get next to was that in that area there are 5 or 6 major penitentiaries. So I wanted to understand something about that, and I did a whole series of works actually around the prison. I went to visit the prisons, I went to photograph in the prisons, and I went to collect personal narratives in the prisons as well. On Main Street, I set up a record store, a record shop, so that people could come in and actually leave their records about what Beacon was, what it was at that moment, and what was changing about it. So I was talking to a lot of residents who'd been there for many, many years, as well as people that were moving there for the first time because DIA Beacon was moving there as well. So it's a very interesting project, and then all of that work was donated to the Historical Society so that people could walk in and use those records in any kind of way they chose to use them, whether they wanted to use the photographs because we made very beautiful photographs, mine, as well as the photographs that I pulled together from all kinds of sources, organized, as well as all of the narratives themselves. And they're all in a little box, and if anybody wants to use them, they can. So there was this sort of wonderful passage. What was happening then in Beacon was that on Sunday afternoon, there was these thousands of people, hundreds of people coming to Beacon. And on the one side, there would be all of these young black people, black families that were coming up to see relatives that were in prisons in and around Beacon. And on the other hand, those are people that were coming to see Richard Sierra. I have always gotten into trouble every place I've gone. And a few years ago, I was commissioned, maybe in 96, maybe 95, I was commissioned by the J. Paul Getty Museum to do a project. They were working with another archivist and historian who had probably one of the richest collections of black daguerreotypes, or of daguerreotypes of black subjects in the country. Really an amazing find. And the Getty was negotiating to acquire some of that work. And in the process, they asked if I might be interested in also doing a joint exhibition with that collector. In the process, I made this piece called "From Here I Saw What Happened," and I cried. And it alone is one of those sort of projects that we could spend like the entire evening talking about, because it raised so many political questions, questions about copyright and about ownership and about appropriation, and the entire piece, of course, made of appropriated images. It was an important piece for me because it was a way in which I really wanted to navigate and to look very critically at not only African American history, but also African Americans as they had appeared in photographic history. So it was this sort of wonderful kind of coming together of two things, a sort of conjoining of two efforts. And so I'll read this text. You became a scientific profile, a Negroid type, an anthropological debate, and a photographic subject. These works, of course, originally were here here at Harvard in the Fogg Museum. The Fogg Museum was the original owners of these images that were in the Agassiz collection. The text is sandblasted on the glass. You became mammy, mama, mother, and then confidant. Ha. Descending the throne, you became foot soldier and cook. You became house, yard, field, in kitchen. You became Uncle Tom, John, and Clemens Jim. Drivers, writers, and men of letters. For your names you took hope and humble. Black and tan, your whipped wind of change howled low, blowing itself smack in the middle of Ellington's orchestra. Billy heard it too and cried strange fruit tears. Born with a veil, you became root worker, juju mama, voodoo queen, hoodoo doctor. Some said you were the spitting image of evil. You became playmate to the patriarch. and its daughter. You became an accomplice. The music for God Bless the Child. Out of deep rivers, mixed match mulattas, a variety of types, mind you, sprung up everywhere. And your resistance was found in the food you placed on the master's table. Ha. You became the joker's joke. And anything but what you were. Some laughed long and hard and loud. And others said, well, the only thing a nigger can do for me is to shine my shoes. You became boots and spades and coons. And restless after the longest winter, you marched and marched and marched. And in your sing-song prayer, you asked, well, didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? From Ritual and Revolution and the 3 cloth pieces that I've made, I seem to sort of work in trilogies somehow. So there was Ritual and Revolution. Again, these are multimedia installations with large pieces, large photographic images that are printed on a diaphanous cloth. This is from the Jefferson Suite, actually, which is an examination of the role of DNA analysis and the mapping of the human genome, the way in which that caused, I think, a number of questions, and a number of artists, lots and lots of artists, did a whole series of projects around this enormous thing that took place. It took our imaginations only about 5 years ago. What would it mean to map the human genome? And the thing that I think is so fascinating is people still continue to talk about race, the black race, and the Chinese race, and the white race. And, with all of the sort of incredible knowledge, it seems like we have this very powerful tool, but in the hands of people who don't really quite know yet what to do with it. And of course, the fascinating thing is that, we're sort of, we have a genome that's not unlike rats, which is really horrible. And from not only did we do this thing with the Jefferson Suite, but then also with the Hampton Project. And you can hear, you have a sense, of course, of how the pieces then work in space. This is the Hampton Project, how the banners hang. And it was a wonderful way of working, because I thought of it as, again, this kind of wonderful quality where no matter where you were standing, you could always see through this sort of layer, so that once you, as the viewer, kind of entered the space, you were indeed a part of the story. That you were a part of history. That you were no longer standing outside of it. That you were a part of the piece. And that was something that was very important to me to try and get to. How do you move, not only myself, but the audience to a new position in relationship to the work of art itself? So these projects have been, they've been important. Fortunately, they've been shown. There are catalogs about them, but they're huge, and so they don't get a chance to air out as much as I'd like to. Yeah, I find like, I have this enormous storage room, and so if anybody has $20, you should come visit. The Louisiana Project. There's a project here also. I have a videotape from the Louisiana Project, which again was this sort of an important body of work, and it's a huge body of work, and tons of pieces that are printed on canvas that are going around the room. Um, you know, it's a very complicated project, and it's probably a little too long to go into now. But it was this way of wanting to really understand something about what Louisiana was as a place. I mean, every time I go to New Orleans, I am absolutely aware of the fact that it is unlike any other place in the United States, right? You feel as though you are not really quite in the United States anymore, that you are someplace else. So they have, you know, these sort of complicated social systems, you know, from octoroons to quadroons to guroons. I mean, kind of, you know, this idea about bloodline is just sort of measured to the nth degree. And so I'll show you a little bit of the videotape later. And because I don't really have enough to do, I actually, you know, started an organization. It's called the Social Studies Project. In this organization, we work with a number of different other artists collaborating on different projects around the United States. The idea being that, you know, when a community needs something done, but they can't necessarily afford it in any other way, then me and people like Daoud Bey and Lonnie Graham and Deborah Willis and a few others have gone to places like Edenville, Florida, the birthplace or the home of Zora Neale Hurston, to do special projects in that area, or to do something special in Cleveland around board, you know, Brown versus the Board of Education, or to do this project in Beacon, New York. So we do any number of projects, and we'll continue to do projects that really bring attention to what I think are communities that are in need, that need the level of our work and our involvement. I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. And these I won't talk to you about, but they're interesting. I'll just, I'm going to jump to this because I do want to show you like a few video pieces. Maybe about a year ago, 2 years ago, I was in. 2 years ago, I was invited to do. I was awarded the Rome Prize, which is really sort of an amazing honor. It was really quite terrific, and I went there. Knowing a great deal about what I wanted to do. I mean, I knew that I wanted to make a film at Cinecittà. I've been in love with, you know, people like Fellini and Pasolini and Antonioni, and watching those films for so long. So I knew that I wanted to make a film while I was there. I also knew that I wanted to make a series of photographs while I was there, and I'll show you a few of those in a few moments. And also that I needed to, you know, at a certain moment, because as I said, one experience always naturally leads to the next. And if you're paying attention to what your work is saying to you, I think it always leads you. It always tells you exactly what it needs. And so suddenly I found myself standing in front of museums. I found myself standing in front of museums. And so this is the sort of work that I'm doing right now, actually, is simply going around the country and around the world, standing in front of museums, you know, asking myself, when and where do I enter? Knowing that for the most part, that the vast majority of museums in the country have absolutely no or very, very little representation of work by artists of color. This is, of course, in Bilbao. And all the photographs are taken just with me alone. I just set up the camera, and I do a lot of running. And it's been a powerful way of marking, to describe, to simply suggest, not to intrude upon, but to simply suggest what is left outside. Someone said that, you know, of course, that what is left out is often more important than what is included. And I keep going back to that idea over and over and over. What is left out, and what does that mean, and how does that affect us all in terms of what we know, what we understand, what we come to appreciate, what we come to value. since we know that this museum system controls so much of how we will think about art, how we will think about what is valuable, how we will think about what's important, how we think about what should be collected, how we think about what should be sold, how we think about what we should buy, etc., etc., etc. The museum system is a powerful, powerful system that I think absolutely has to be reminded in all kinds of ways. When and where do I enter? How can I make this insertion? How can I make this level of awareness? How can I increase this level of awareness? By simply being present. By simply being present, I am reminded, I'm a reminder of what's left outside. And then finally, this sort of short group of photographs. I actually have many, 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 because I do work a lot. These pieces are about 5 feet by 7 feet. And so they're large. I think we actually, again, we have a few here. I'm really happy that a few of them are here. Magdalena Campos has also shown some at her really wonderful space, Gasp, which is perfect, Gasp. You know, in Italy, again, there was something really important about using this skin, about using this body to sort of crawl through space and to really know something, not only about ancient Rome, not only something about ancient Rome, but about contemporary Rome as well. And so every morning, very, very, very early, I would get up and I would go out and I would just stand in front of places and photograph myself standing in front of places. I wanted to know something again about that ancient quality of Rome. This is the city of Matera, extraordinary city where up until only a few years ago, people still lived in caves in and around the city of Matera. Now some of them are being taken over and reclaimed and used as art spaces, etc. But for a long time, people in Italy were very, very poor and very, very desperate in various parts of that city. And there's something about that that I thought was really important to explore, to look at, and to know again in my own skin, in my own body. One of the few pyramids existing outside of Egypt, of course, exists in the city of Rome, and of course all around Rome are these sort of marvelous obelisks that have been brought from Egypt and placed around the city as serious markers for a relationship, marking a relationship, and of course marking a level of conquest as well. And those ideas were really important to me. Somebody asked me when I was in Rome, you know, white people are really confused about a lot of things. And so people would ask me, what was I doing in Rome? What was I doing in Rome? I thought that was fascinating. A stupid question. So, you know, so there were all of these things, you know, like, you know, going out on May Day because I wanted to be amongst workers. Going to certain churches, small churches, important churches, because I needed to understand something about the way religion was functioning in the city. Walking through the Jewish quarter and going there as often as possible and marking that little place as a ghetto that it was. Going through San Lorenzo, one of the most sort of progressive parts of the city, existing right outside the wall, the Aurelian Wall, as a vital, vital part of the city that is very often not pictured. It's not really the normal picture that we have so much of Rome. Right? When we think about that city, right, this working class district of Rome that continues to be the most progressive part of Rome and that was the only section in Rome that was bombed during the war. Really, really fascinating part of the city. And then, of course, there's that fascist part of Rome that, you know, rarely gets talked about as well, that I also needed to really mark, right? So that, you know, there's, you know, I wanted to go to Rome since I was like, you know, like I saw Gidget and just knew that I was going. Do you know what I mean? Like Gidget goes to Rome. I mean, you know, that's where I'm going. You know, and so I spent a lot of time walking and looking and then making my way towards the Aeor, that section of Rome, that fascist part of Rome. right? The way in which the architecture really imposes itself upon the citizens, right? Making you constantly aware that you are at the behest, that you are only there at the behest of the city, right? And therefore you are forever grateful in relationship to the city. And that the architecture makes you feel that way. Yes, it's beautiful, but yes, it's overpowering, right? So you walk around like this. Very powerful. It's very powerful. It's very scary. Part of the way in which architecture really begins to then articulate the power of the state itself. And then finally, to Cinecittà, where I was allowed just a little bit of time. It was really kind of extraordinary that, because the Italians are really nuts. And working with them was just a great joy and a great pleasure and privilege. And so that I was able to move into the city, be there for less than a year, work in Cinecittà, right next to Fellini's old studio, was truly one of the great gifts given in my life. So I'm forever indebted to the American Academy for the honor. What I'm going to do now, we've been going for almost an hour. Can I take a few more minutes and show some video work? Would that be okay with the audience? Yes. Yeah, it's okay? Okay. The first piece then that I'm going to show you is not actually from this Cinecittà piece, but I'm going to show you another piece that and they're short, they're like 5 minutes. This one is called Before the Loss of You, and I've been really trying to figure out, I've been wanting to write an opera about Nelson and Winnie Mandela for a really long time. And so I thought, okay, well, it's complicated. It's a very complicated story, but maybe one place that I can start, one little place that I could start might be with thinking about when they were young. If I could just if I can sort of nail that, then maybe I might be able to get to the rest of it. And so this little piece is called Before the Loss of You, and it's just about 5 minutes long. And Dave, you can start whenever you want. I remember those memories as though the memory was the moment. They are inscribed on my soul. We were young, just past the age of puppy love, and our love was as tender as the night, filled with light, air, with bubbles that could not burst. In spring, I was crazy about you. I would walk with you to the end of time. You illuminated me like a bright star, brilliant. You were my honey, sweet and sticky. And with you, I made secrets to be shared with you alone. I wanted you so bad, I could taste it. It was not a rich woman's love, but something to gain. But a yearning born of heat, torrent and wild, strong with odor, blood, shit, madness. You were my unsung hero, my Malcolm, my Martin, my unstrung jewel, my myth in the making, all sex, power, and black. I liked you that way. I could sit in front of and back of, or crawl alongside of you. It really didn't matter, and I knew no shame. But we were trapped in an ageless labyrinth of imperial power. So our love stood in the shadows of an insidious force. We were riding against time and history and ourselves. I knew I'd lose you, that maybe you'd be dead by day, killed by an assassin's bullet, gone before nightfall like a thousand others, or maybe even like an outlaw sent to the underground.
Foolish and fearless, we were fear, black, new, in the future. And we laughed against the coming of that day, and loved. But like my father, the myth became a man, and I, a woman, and things began to fall apart. My world fell apart. While standing in the spotlight of history, I knew all was lost, and I stumbled along in the recesses of my mind looking for answers that were not there, trying to find the broken threads, the missing pieces, the remains, to fit it all back together again, like it was when we could taste the sun in our mouths, long ago and far away, and before everything. Before everything, and we were not yet beaten by time or circumstance, by age or greed or clubs or rage, loss and suffering, defeats large or small. Before the bombings and the burnings, the torture and the mysterious deaths, the disease and the destruction, before confusion and misdirection, before detention, Sharpeville, Soweto, before the loss of you, before you were snatched from my loving embrace, before the dust settled upon your soul and covered even you in crime, sending you into an endless darkness, before the exile and the murder of our friends and the kidnapping of our children, before death squads and passports and the ANC, before truth and reconciliation, after your release and before my judgment, when it was just me and you and us together against the world, against the will of my mother and the blessing of my father. Before any and all of this, when we were younger than young, and you rode me a hobby horse into the age of revolution, whispering you loved me. I was mad about you, giddy and drunk.
Show you one more very short piece, which is called Make Someone Happy, and then I'll be happy to take any comments if you'd like. Again, this is a very short piece, about 3 minutes, I think.
It's so important to make someone happy. Make just one someone happy. Make just one heart-to-heart you. You sing to one smile that cheers you, one face that lights when it nears you, one girl you're everything to fame. If you win it, comes and goes in a minute. Where's the real stuff in life to cling to? Love is the answer. Someone to love is the answer. Once you found her, build your world around her. Make someone happy. Make just one someone happy, and you will be happy. happy too.